heaven. Now war arose in heaven. We're just going to stop there. I know the book of Revelation is full of symbols and deep meanings. But when you picture war in heaven, what a devastating thought that has to be to us. We see it right now. We have a world that's at war, and we see the images of people who are hurt and wounded and hopeless, and they don't have food and they don't have shelter, and they're grimy and dirty, and they have this vacant look in their eyes. War is a horrible thing. We know that here on earth, but can we imagine what that means in heaven? Now, war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives unto the death. Therefore, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short." So, war in heaven. It's a concept that's hard for us, isn't it? We always picture blue skies and pearly gates and everything is great. But there was war in heaven. An incredible thing John is getting us to realize here. An incredible thing is happening, and it's hard for us to imagine, but I think it's vital for us to understand. How do you picture war in heaven? Gustav Doré is kind of the easy one to look at that gives the picture of, his idea of war in heaven. And of course, as you look at that picture, it's kind of typical of others. You have the swords and the spears and things like that. But nothing tells us what war looks like in heaven. I feel like the swords and the spears were a product of its time, don't you? Maybe nowadays we'd have tanks and guns and lasers or something. But we would have something there. But we don't know really what it looked like when there was war in heaven. And really, when you think about it, it's something our Father could have quashed immediately. So there must be some lesson for us to consider that there's this war in heaven. What point is Jehovah making to us about the war in heaven? So we see the two sides. We see Michael and his angels, and we see the dragon, and the dragon is described as the devil, who's the accuser. And that's mentioned several times in this passage, isn't it? That he's the accuser. In fact, it says he accuses the brethren day and night. Unendingly, unrelentingly, he's accusing us. He is Satan. And what does Satan mean? We talked about it in class this morning if you were here. Satan also has the idea of adversary, the one who is opposed to us. And of course, he's the deceiver. I like how John puts it here in this revelation, because he's the deceiver, he says, of the whole world. And that's really what we're talking about with this war in heaven. That there is this battle happening that affects the whole world and the whole worldview. The great thing about this passage, though, is we know the results of the battle right away, don't we? Satan is defeated. The dragon is defeated. And we're told in verse 9 he's thrown down to earth. And when he goes down to the earth, what does it say about him? He has come down to you, and he's in great wrath because his time is short. Now, I've emphasized the great wrath because I think when we picture one who is an accuser and an adversary and a deceiver, great wrath adds to all those thoughts a sense of urgency, of hatred, of desire to really hurt. But maybe what we also should notice is that it says he has come down to you in great wrath. It's about us. It's about everyone who's on this earth. So, is there still war when he comes down? The one who's the accuser. Although he's no longer in heaven, there's a war happening on earth. And I'm going to suggest to you that Satan is not interested in the physical planet Earth at all. He wants to change how we think to how he thinks. He thought in certain ways, and because of how he thought, there's war in heaven. He comes down to earth in great wrath, and he wants to change my way of thinking to his way of thinking. And he's come down, as I've already said, to you. And that thought should be terrifying. Shouldn't it? He's come down to you in great wrath. How will the devil, how will Satan, how will the deceiver of the whole world change how you think? How is he going to accomplish that? We're told in a couple of passages, and I think we're familiar with them, but if you want to, in 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, verses 3 through 6, it talks about us that we are waging war. And in that passage, the Apostle Paul talks about the strongholds that are opposed to Christ and what is right. He talks about arguments and lofty opinions and about disobedience. Of course, disobedience comes from those thoughts, doesn't it? Right? So there's arguments. Satan doesn't just let us think what we want to think. He's going to try to convince us differently. And he's going to not just give us opinions, but they're going to be opinions that seem very high and noble and right. Often those who deny God will try to sound to some extent noble. Famously, Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, he says, in the chapter, I think it's about the selfish gene, he says, let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish. There's an argument for you, right? We're born selfish. So let's teach altruism and let's teach generosity. But there are foundations underneath that. They sound great. It's a lofty opinion, right? But it's deceiving. It's not true. And of course, leads to disobedience. In Colossians, the 2nd chapter, verses 8 through 13, we can read more about these weapons that are described by Paul in this passage as the elemental spirits of this world. And he talks about philosophy, how he uses philosophy against us. In this case, I want to remind you of Bertrand Russell, who said, the only thing that will redeem mankind is cooperation. Which again, I look at that and I think, well, that's a great philosophy. And wouldn't that be nice if we all cooperated? But what is it that we seem to be really, really bad about? Do you see us cooperating well? We started, after some world wars, we started a thing called the United Nations, which sounds great. How has that cooperation worked out? Again, it's a lofty thought. It's a great philosophy. It sounds wonderful, but there's a problem in it. The only thing, he says, that will redeem us is cooperation. The other thing he talks about is empty deceit. Boy, sometimes it's just out there, right? Sometimes it's not fancy. Sometimes it's just we're being deceived by the things that are being said. And he also mentions human tradition. I wanted to talk a little bit about those elemental spirits of the world. These are the most basic things, essentially, is what that means. And Satan and the world want to reduce us to the most basic parts of our nature as defined by them, I guess. I'm not sure how to say that right. We might use the word primal in a situation like that. Things that go to the base of who we really are and what we really are about. That's Dawkins saying we have the selfish gene, right? That's the underlying thing about us. And he wants us to go back to that. Our Father, in contrast to those elemental things of the world, wants us to go higher, to be spiritually minded, to be more nobly minded, and to think nobly. But the world wants us to go back to those very basic things. There's nothing more important, they would say, than meeting your most basic needs. Those things that are necessary for survival, and they define what's necessary for survival. Those things that are most selfish, that are most pleasing to me. And even while doing that, they will say, well, we're going to try to teach generosity and altruism, and we can throw Russell in there with cooperation, because they're really not in our nature, but that's what we're trying to do. How does Satan accomplish this? It's actually shown to us pretty well in the scriptures. Again, I think we're familiar with this. We go back to the garden, and there's Eve and Satan, and they're right by that one tree. And Satan appears in this case not as a dragon. He doesn't appear to her as the accuser or the adversary or the deceiver of the whole world. He comes as a serpent. And I guess this shouldn't surprise us, because what does Paul say in 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 4 about how Satan disguises himself? It says there that he disguises himself as an angel of light. He comes offering knowledge. He comes in a way that seems beautiful and right and good to us. To many of us, though, we look at Satan coming in the form of a serpent and say, well, that was evil. A serpent, my wife would very much agree with this, epitomizes evil. And according to her, they should all die. But when God created everything, he created it very good. I don't think Eve had that same thought about serpents that we have. Why would Eve fear or suspect the serpent in the garden? He comes as an angel of light. And he taught Eve to think like he thinks. Did God actually say? Well, you will not surely die. Your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God. All that sounds fantastic, doesn't it? You're not going to die. Oh yeah, maybe God said that, but did God actually say you're not going to die? And you're going to have eyes opened. You're going to be like God. Of course, all of us know that these are lies, but do they sound like lies to Eve? And the answer to that has to be, apparently, no. To her, they sounded like things that she needed to think about, that she needed to consider, that she needed to understand. They sound reasonable. They are the lofty arguments and the philosophy, and yet they're also at the same time empty deceit, and they lead to disobedience, don't they? It's even simpler for Adam, because he just takes it from his wife and eats of the fruit. But after they eat of it, something happens. Their eyes are opened. There's a sense in which what the devil did at that moment, your eyes will be opened, it was true. And it's confirmed in the scripture. Their eyes were opened. But the question is, what were their eyes opened to? What did they think it meant? And what actually happened? And their eyes being opened was not a good thing, because now they realize that they're naked. And what that means is Adam and Eve are seeing the world differently. They're thinking differently. And that's why they gave in to that. Please don't get me wrong. This was her choice. And it was his choice to eat of the fruit. She wasn't forced to. Satan's not going to make us sin. And James 1 tells us very clearly how sin happens. That it has to do with our own desires. And desire, when he gives birth to sin, sin leads to death. But understand that it did happen because Satan knew what he was doing, because he's at war with you. And we shouldn't think that just because we're not Eve and we're not in the garden and there's not that particular tree standing right there, that Satan's not at war with us. How does he do this? I want you to think with me in Romans, the first chapter, about how Paul describes it in that passage. Romans, the first chapter. He's, in this passage, making a contrast between those who are righteousness and the righteousness that is found in the gospel and those who are unrighteous. And he says in verse 21, "For although they knew God, they didn't honor him as God or give him thanks." They knew God. Did Satan know God when he was in heaven? I mean, it's a stupid question, right, Dave? Of course he did. He's created by God. He's in heaven with him. But also, Satan knew God, but he didn't honor him, did he? Nor was he thankful. You see, the dragon changes how we think about God to the way he thinks. And it's more subtle than we think it happens, because it's not the dragon, it's the angel of light. That is how he does it. And Paul says in Romans 1 that these people became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Futile thinking and darkened hearts. What is Satan doing? I mean, it's very clear he's changing how we think. He changed how Eve thought in the garden. She's in the garden where God has given them everything that they need, and Satan comes and all of a sudden, I want more. There must be something better. And he does the same thing to us. We're brought into his deception. And our thoughts change. We have a worldview now that denies God, that defies God, and that exalts ourselves. Verse 22, he says, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Although they knew God, but now because of the way that their thinking has changed, it's foolishness. And verse 23 explains the foolishness where they exchanged the glory of a immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. I want to talk a little bit about that exchange. Because isn't that the essence of changing our thoughts? Is that exchange that we're talking about? You take the glory of an immortal God. And again, I want to take you back in mind, the dragon in heaven, Satan in heaven, knows the glory of God. And probably in ways that we don't even consider. And we take that glory of an immortal God, and he says, because our thoughts have changed, we accept for deity mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Sometimes in our more modern era, we say or reduce that statement to self. It doesn't say that. Paul doesn't say self. He says mortal man. Not just about me, but about who we are also. We change those thoughts. So why would you exchange real deity for man or animals? Is it a failure to understand God? For although they knew God is where that passage begins. Although they knew God, has he not revealed himself gloriously in many ways? No, Paul's already explained that that's not true. Why did Eve choose to eat of the fruit? Is that not evidence of that primal way of thinking? And is it not typical ultimately of each of us that we hear the angel of light? And God goes on in verses 26 and 28 to say, for this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions. And he lists some of those things that they're doing that are sinful together. Men and women doing things that are contrary to nature, and he describes many of them. But not just the actions, he also says to a debased mind, to do things that ought not to be done. He gives them up to dishonorable passions. Are all passions bad? Certainly not. God has given us all kinds of desires. So he speaks of dishonorable passions, things that Satan has changed our mind about, that are debased, that are primal, that are at the beginning. In Genesis 6, verse 5, how bad does it eventually get? Every intention of their heart was only evil continually. That's by the time of Noah and the flood, right? It began with Eve, but it just kept getting worse. So bad to the point that eventually God says, I have to do something. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5 talks about it being every thought needs to be brought captive. Colossians 2, verse 21 speaks of being alienated in mind. Romans 1, verse 21 talks about being futile in our thinking. Yet we think we're wise. Understand, when Satan's attacking, he's attacking your thoughts and hoping that that's what leads to disobedience. Sometimes we like to say the world has changed, but it's not really the world that's changed. I've changed. And there's a way of thinking that the world thinks about what's in the world that's different from what God intended. We see the world differently. Our eyes have been opened and we realize we're naked. We think about the world differently and we relate to the world differently. And so we follow a satanic way of thinking, exalting self, following after violence, debased minds, being corrupt and cruel, and exploiting. And the question is, how is God going to fix all of that? The world is corrupted. How does he reconcile us to him? It's not just individuals, it's pervasive. It's a pervasive problem in the world. There's an atmosphere in the world that pulls us away from God, where we're alienated from him, we rebel against him. What kind of power would our God use to fight the dragon? Will he help us? Will he save us? And how is he going to do it? And it's important for us to understand he's going to do it differently than probably we think he is, and differently than it's been pictured in our pictures that I showed you earlier of war in heaven. 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter and verse 4 says, the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh. I think we make a mistake when we put swords and spears in heaven. He says, the weapons of our warfare are divine power. So, what is the divine power that he's using to get our minds back to where they need to be? So in Revelation, go back finally, right? Revelation, the 12th chapter and verse 10. When he's first thrown down to the earth, John records, and I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation. There it is. Our God's helping us, right? Now there's salvation. There's war in heaven. He's been thrown down, but now there is salvation and power and the kingdom and the authority of the Christ. What do we have on our side? God wants to save us. He's going to use that divine power. He brings the kingdom. He brings the authority of Christ, and we can have that victory. In Colossians, the 2nd chapter, in verse 15, he uses 3 terms to talk about how all of this is defeated. The philosophies and the deceit and the things that men teach. He says they've been disarmed. They've been put to open shame. And he's triumphed over them. I mean, it's great going from war in heaven to triumph, isn't it? Still, how exactly does he do it? We get the point. He wins. And if we're with him, we win, right? How would we imagine God in battle? If you think of it in the sense that God is bigger and more powerful, I mean, that's true, but is that how he triumphed? And the answer is no, because power is the way the world thinks. Just raw power. Revelation 12 and in verse 11. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives unto death. How does the battle in heaven happen? How does he conquer? Where's the triumph? It's by the blood of the Lamb. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. When he says he triumphed by the blood of the Lamb, we see someone who comes to earth to save us, who becomes a man like us, and he follows that all the way to the cross as a sacrifice for us. And what we're told over and over and over again in the scriptures is that the reason that he's doing that is because of love. How does God win the war in heaven? Love. Love for us. Love for the world that he's created. And that triumphs over what Satan is trying to do. That triumphs over what the devil is trying to do. He's trying to get us to think again correctly. And that's not a battle that's won by swords and power. It's by reminding us that God is love. And those who follow after him need to be people who love also. And that's powerful, isn't it? Again, not love as the world defines love, because sometimes Satan has corrupted that. But that's what the rest of the Bible is about, is helping us understand what that love is and what it really means. I get that. But let's not picture a fight with swords and spears, but God triumphing because of love. And not just love, but it says also conquered by the blood, but also by the word of their testimony. They didn't love their lives to the death. Hebrews puts it this way in Hebrews 10, verse 23, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And I like that verse a lot because it has the reminder God is faithful and says, therefore, we should be faithful. Let's hold fast. So one of the ways in which he triumphs is that he's changed our mind so much that we hold to him. We cling to him because he loved us first. And we should love him. And so we cling to him in that faithfulness. How does he win? Love and faithfulness. And that amazes me. Doesn't it amaze you? Does it change your picture of the war in heaven? Because it changes mine. He triumphed not by giving in to the worldview of Satan, which is selfish and focuses on just might. Jesus triumphed by being obedient even to the death. He triumphed by being good, by being holy, by choosing to be righteous. He triumphed by the power of loving service, humble obedience, sacrifice for others. And he did that so he could reconcile, as Paul says in Colossians 2, verse 20, he could reconcile all things to himself, whether in earth or in heaven. He's making peace by the cross. And that's why this is a great salvation. War in heaven, won by love. Love that gave itself for us. This morning, you can be reconciled to God. If you believe that Jesus is the Christ and you're ready because of that belief, your sins can be washed away. If you'll repent, be baptized, those sins can be washed away. Perhaps you're a brother or sister in Christ, and right now, you're really facing challenges from the accuser. The dragon's getting to you. Maybe that happens. Let us know so that we can pray for you and help you as we can. If you're subject to the invitation, come forward as we stand and sing.